Rachel and Daniel Whitmore seemed like the perfect couple, but behind their polished smiles and quiet suburban life, a chilling truth was festering. Daniel was planning his wife's death, not because she wronged him, but because she gained weight. This is the terrifying story of how love turned to resentment, and how a woman's body became the excuse for a cold-blooded murder that shocked an entire community. To everyone in the quiet neighborhood of Cedar Grove, Daniel and Rachel Whitmore were the picture of stability and happiness. Their two-story brick house sat perfectly in line with the others, its lawn always trimmed, the porch clean, a seasonal wreath always hanging neatly on the door. Daniel, in his early 40s, wore glasses and tucked-in shirts, drove a modest sedan, and taught biology at the local high school. Rachel, his wife of 9 years, was warm-hearted and known for organizing charity bake sales and neighborhood yard sales. She had a kind laugh, the type that lingered in the air even after she walked away, and always offered help to anyone who needed it. Their social media accounts displayed vacations to national parks, anniversary dinners, and holiday mornings with big smiles and wrapped gifts. The photos were saturated with warm tones and affection, leaving no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But beneath the curated images and polite small talk lay a much different story. In truth, their marriage had begun to unravel slowly, quietly, and dangerously. Rachel had struggled with weight since her early 20s, and after a traumatic miscarriage 5 years into their marriage, she slipped into a depression that caused her to gain more. Comfort eating became a habit, and over the years her body changed in ways that she could not hide, even under her favorite flowing dresses or layered winter coats. She stopped posing fully in pictures, favoring angles and filters. She stopped going to the gym, telling herself she'd go back next Monday, but never did. Yet she kept up her smile for the world. Daniel noticed every change, but not with concern. At first, he pretended to be supportive, encouraging Rachel to go for walks and eat healthier meals. But it wasn't encouragement, it was pressure, cold and clinical. Slowly, his kindness turned into criticism. He no longer offered hugs when she cried in frustration. He no longer waited up for her when she came home late from volunteering. He no longer made her feel like a woman he loved. Instead, he began treating her like a problem that needed to be fixed. Friends who visited their home noticed Daniel's silence at dinners, the way he rolled his eyes when Rachel talked about planning community events. But Rachel always defended him. "He's just tired," she'd say. "He works so hard." And it was true, Daniel did work hard. But his work at school was increasingly used as a way to avoid home. He started staying later, claiming lesson planning and parent meetings. In reality, he just didn't want to be around his wife anymore. What no one knew was that Daniel had developed a growing resentment. It started small, a feeling of embarrassment when Rachel squeezed into a restaurant booth, a flicker of irritation when she asked for a second helping of dessert. Over time, that irritation hardened into loathing. He blamed her for the lack of intimacy in their relationship. He blamed her for his inability to feel proud of his marriage. He began to see her not as his partner, but as a burden, an obstacle between him and the life he believed he deserved. He became obsessed with appearances. In public, he continued to hold Rachel's hand and smile at the right moments, but at home, he withdrew into silence or, worse, sarcasm. He started comparing her to other women on television, in advertisements, even his co-workers. Rachel noticed the change, and though she tried to fix things, cooking his favorite meals, suggesting therapy, buying new clothes, nothing worked. Daniel was already slipping into a place where his heart no longer had room for her. Rachel felt the rejection deeply. She began journaling in secret, something she hadn't done since high school. The entry started out hopeful plans to start a new diet, notes about trying a new walking routine. But over time, her words became darker, more desperate. She questioned her worth, wondered if she was the cause of Daniel's unhappiness, and wrote about sleepless nights filled with anxiety and guilt. She still loved him, despite everything. And that was the most tragic part. She couldn't see that she was in danger. While Rachel fought to hold on to a crumbling relationship, Daniel's thoughts took a sinister turn. He didn't believe in divorce. His parents had been married for 40 years, and in his mind, divorce equated failure, shame, and social embarrassment. He believed he had worked too hard to build the life he had, and he wasn't about to let it collapse because his wife didn't fit his expectations. So instead of leaving, he started fantasizing about what life would be like without her. Those thoughts began as passing notions, quiet daydreams he would push away. But then they stayed, they repeated, they grew. He began researching things harmless at first: diet, drugs, sleep disorders, accidental injuries. Then the searches turned darker. He was methodical, always clearing his history, always erasing traces. He told himself he wasn't planning anything. He was just curious. But deep down, he knew what he was doing. He began looking at Rachel differently, not as a person, but as a problem to solve. Her routines, her medications, her habits, he studied them all. She always drank tea before bed. She always took her vitamins in the morning. He noticed which foods she avoided and which she loved. He started isolating her slowly. At first, by convincing her that her family didn't support her anymore. Then, by making her believe her friendships were conditional. Whenever she tried to talk to him, he dismissed her feelings, subtly making her question her own mind. It worked. Rachel began staying indoors more often, choosing silence over confrontation, comfort food over disappointment. She wore the same few oversized clothes, rarely looked in the mirror, and when she did, she turned away quickly. Neighbors still waved when they saw her walking to the mailbox. She waved back, smiling faintly, but her eyes were distant. Some of them sensed something was off, but didn't want to interfere. Daniel's friendly nods and tidy lawn didn't match the image of a troubled home. No one wanted to believe that something so dark could exist behind those doors. As the weeks went by, Rachel's physical health worsened. She often felt dizzy, sometimes nauseous, and chalked it up to stress and poor sleep. She mentioned it once to her sister, who encouraged her to see a doctor, but she never did. She didn't want to face the truth, or maybe, deep down, she already knew something was terribly wrong. And so the mask stayed on. The perfect couple lived on in the eyes of their community. No one knew the thoughts Daniel kept to himself, or how close he was to taking action. No one saw the way he stared at Rachel when she wasn't looking, eyes filled not with love but with calculation. The storm that had been building for years was about to break. And when it did, it would leave behind a horror no one could have imagined, not in Cedar Grove, and certainly not in the Whitmore home. It began with small, strange feelings Rachel couldn't explain. At first, it was just tiredness, deep, dragging exhaustion that clung to her even after a full night's sleep. Then came the faintness, like the world tilting slightly to the side when she stood up too quickly. She dismissed it, blaming her weight, her lack of exercise, or maybe her diet. But then came the forgetfulness, misplacing things, forgetting names, zoning out in the middle of conversations. She began to feel like she was unraveling one quiet piece at a time. Rachel didn't speak to anyone about it. Not because she didn't want to, but because she no longer felt she had anyone to speak to. Daniel had grown distant. He was never outright cruel. Instead, he was detached, cold in a way that couldn't be explained to others. He was careful in public, never raising his voice or making scenes. But behind closed doors, he gave her nothing, not support, not affection, not kindness. His indifference was suffocating. When she mentioned feeling sick, he barely reacted. When she asked if he noticed how forgetful she'd become, he told her it was just age catching up. His explanations made her feel silly, irrational. And because she wanted so badly to believe him, she brushed aside the growing list of symptoms and continued moving through each day like she always had. She started to rely on her journal more. It was a plain, leather-bound book with soft pages that had grown worn at the edges from use. Her entries became her only outlet. She wrote about feeling watched, about moments when she woke up gasping in the night with no memory of falling asleep. She wrote about the nights Daniel didn't come home until late and the days when he barely looked at her. One line repeated again and again, scattered through the pages like a warning she didn't fully understand. Something I send right. Despite her discomfort, Rachel tried to stick to her routines. She continued volunteering at the animal shelter twice a week. She cooked dinner most nights, even though Daniel rarely ate with her. She walked around the block some mornings, more out of habit than health. But the exhaustion deepened, and even the smallest tasks felt overwhelming. She chalked it up to her weight, again blaming herself, again searching for reasons that didn't involve the person she shared her home with. What she didn't know was that Daniel had been carefully, quietly altering her world. It had started a few months earlier. Daniel had discovered an online forum where people discussed poisons, sedatives, and how to manipulate behavior. Some of the conversations were clearly fictional, others disturbingly real. He didn't post anything, he only read, taking notes in his head. One of the substances mentioned repeatedly was a prescription sleep medication known to cause memory lapses and fatigue if misused. He learned how it could be crushed, dissolved, and slipped into food or drinks without leaving a strong taste. When Rachel began complaining of dizziness and mental fog, Daniel knew it was working. He was cautious, using just enough to keep her subdued. He slipped the drug into her evening tea twice a week, spacing out the doses to avoid detection. On days when she seemed especially alert or suspicious, he held back. He wanted her to doubt herself, not confront him. He wanted her mind to slowly slip further into confusion while he kept control of the narrative. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. She began forgetting conversations and appointments. She burned food. She left doors unlocked. Once, she nearly fell asleep standing at the sink. Each time she tried to tell Daniel, he shrugged it off or gave her vague reassurances that she was just tired. Eventually, she stopped bringing it up at all. Daniel used her decline to his advantage. He subtly hinted to neighbors and coworkers that Rachel had been under a lot of stress, struggling emotionally. He told her sister during a phone call that she was having a hard time coping with some health issues. He wasn't concerned that people would look deeper. Rachel wasn't the type to ask for help. She suffered quietly, out of pride or fear or both. As the weeks dragged on, Rachel's entries in her journal shifted in tone. She began questioning her own memories. She wrote about shadows in the hallway at night, about waking up on the couch without remembering falling asleep there. She described the terrifying sensation of being followed inside her own home. She felt watched, but not by someone outside. She couldn't say it outright, not even to herself, but the suspicion was beginning to form. One entry, dated 3 weeks before her death, read, "He stood in the doorway last night. I woke up, and he was just standing there. He didn't move. When I blinked, he was gone. I thought maybe it was a dream, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being hunted, like I'm prey." She never showed the journal to anyone. Part of her feared she would sound paranoid. Another part feared she was right. The idea that Daniel might be hurting her was too painful to fully confront, so she tucked it away under vague words and half-finished thoughts. Her physical appearance changed too. She lost interest in clothes, stopped doing her hair, and wore the same slippers around the house until the solace nearly fell off. Her once bright eyes were often dull with fatigue. Her skin looked paler, she moved slower. Still, no one in her life intervened. Those who saw her assumed she was just going through something personal, and Daniel made sure to keep them at a distance. Rachel's isolation was nearly complete. Only once did she take a step toward escape. One rainy afternoon, she searched online for a local therapist. She even filled out the contact form. But when the confirmation email came through, Daniel intercepted it. She never followed up. The journal continued to capture her unraveling thoughts. She questioned reality. She doubted her mind. She tried to cling to logic but found it slipping from her grasp. Her final entries were short and fragmented. One simply read, "If I disappear, check everything." Daniel, meanwhile, had already begun setting the next phase of his plan in motion. The drugging had served its purpose. Rachel was weak, unstable, and easily dismissed. Now he was watching for the right moment, a mistake, a misstep. An opportunity to make her death seem inevitable, even expected. What Rachel never realized, even in her most lucid moments, was how far Daniel was willing to go. She feared she was losing her mind. But the truth was even darker. She was being slowly erased, one dose, one lie, one omission at a time. And the most chilling part? She still loved him. Even as she withered, even as the walls closed in. Even as the person she trusted most quietly turned into the architect of her end. The rain hadn't stopped all day, casting a gray, dull light over the Whitmore house. The streets of Cedar Grove were quiet, the kind of stillness that settled when the skies stayed heavy for hours. In the early evening, a 911 call came in from Daniel Whitmore. His voice was steady, controlled, but laced with just enough panic to sound believable. He told the dispatcher that his wife had fallen down the stairs. He said he'd found her unconscious, not breathing. He said he thought she might be dead. Paramedics arrived within minutes, lights flashing through the drizzle. Rachel was lying motionless at the bottom of the staircase, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. The scene looked tragically ordinary, no broken furniture, no signs of struggle. Just a woman who had apparently lost her footing on a wet night. Daniel stood nearby in a sweatshirt and sweatpants, barefoot, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He kept repeating that he didn't know what happened, that he'd been upstairs and heard a thump, then silence. He said Rachel must have slipped. The laundry basket nearby, turned on its side with a few towels spilled out, seemed to support his story. Rachel was declared dead at the scene. The paramedics saw nothing overtly suspicious. Given her size and reported health issues, a fall seemed sadly plausible. The bruising on her body could have easily come from the tumble, and with no obvious signs of trauma beyond the impact injuries. Police initially closed the incident as an accidental death. Daniel's demeanor was somber but composed. He answered questions without hesitation, provided details calmly, and cooperated fully. When asked if Rachel had been drinking or taking medications, he mentioned she had seemed tired lately and sometimes got dizzy. He mentioned stress. He mentioned weight. He never once mentioned the journal she had hidden in the back of her closet. The next few days passed in a blur of condolences, paperwork, and planning. Daniel arranged a small, understated funeral. He didn't invite many people. Rachel's sister Emily flew in from Chicago and found Daniel to be strangely unemotional. When she asked how Rachel had been in the days before her death, he said she'd been quiet, distant, not quite herself. That seemed to satisfy most people. After all, who really knew what went on inside a marriage? But something about it bothered Emily. Her last phone call with Rachel had been weeks ago. Rachel had sounded off, but not in a way Emily could describe. She had seemed like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Now, looking back, that silence felt louder than any words. Emily asked Daniel if Rachel had been seeing a therapist. He said no. She asked about any journals or notebooks. He shrugged. If she did, I never saw them, he said. Rachel's cause of death was officially listed as blunt force trauma from an accidental fall. The toxicology report showed trace amounts of a sedative, but not enough to raise alarms. It was noted in the file and dismissed. The lead detective signed off, the case was closed, and Rachel was laid to rest on a cloudy Monday afternoon. But not everyone moved on. Detective Maria Evans had worked on the case briefly before it was handed over to others. Something about it lingered with her. The scene had been too clean, the injuries too contained. She had reviewed countless fall cases in her career, and most of them looked messier than this. Rachel's head injury was severe, but the rest of her body bore bruises that didn't align with the staircase tumble. Some were older. Some were faint yellow and green under the skin signs of earlier trauma. Evans wasn't officially on the case anymore, but she kept thinking about Rachel, about the sedative in her system, about the way Daniel had stood at the top of the stairs when they arrived, not beside his wife. She requested the full case file and took it home one evening. She read it cover to cover twice. That night she decided to take a closer look. Rachel's medical records showed no history of anxiety or sleep disorders, conditions that might explain the presence of sedatives. Her family doctor had never prescribed anything of the sort. If the drug wasn't coming from a legitimate source, where was it coming from? Evans reached out to a colleague in cyber forensics and asked for a quiet review of Daniel's computer. What they found changed everything. Daniel had searched for ways to make a fall look accidental. He had read articles about how certain medications could impair balance. He had visited forums where people discussed slowly poisoning spouses without detection. He had deleted most of it, but digital traces remained fragments of deleted files, browser caches, timestamps. It wasn't direct evidence, but it was enough to warrant a deeper look. Evans contacted Rachel's sister and asked if she knew of anything Rachel might have left behind, notes, letters, anything. Emily remembered the question about the journal and felt a chill. She flew back to Texas and asked to go through Rachel's things. Inside the hallway closet, under a pile of old coats and a broken umbrella, she found a worn brown journal tucked inside a shoebox marked Christmas lights. The entries painted a terrifying picture. Rachel wrote about being tired, confused, and scared. She suspected something was happening to her but couldn't prove it. Her final entries were particularly chilling. One said, "If I die suddenly, tell someone to check everything. He's been watching me." Another said, "My thoughts don't feel like mine anymore." Detective Evans brought the journal into evidence. Combined with the digital findings and inconsistencies in the autopsy, she had enough to request the case be reopened. A search warrant was issued for the Whitmore home. In the kitchen pantry, behind a row of soup cans, officers found an unmarked bottle of crushed sedatives. Lab analysis confirmed it matched the drug in Rachel's system. Daniel was arrested at school the next morning, taken out of his classroom in handcuffs. His colleagues were stunned. His students, many of whom had admired him, stared in silence as the man they thought they knew was led away. Under interrogation, Daniel initially denied everything, but the weight of the evidence was too much. Faced with the journal, the search history, and the bottle, he confessed, coldly. He admitted to drugging Rachel, manipulating her, isolating her, and ultimately waiting for the right moment. He called it the cleanest option. He said she had made his life unbearable. He showed no remorse. The community of Cedar Grove reeled. The couple everyone thought was perfect had been a lie. The quiet, respectful teacher had been a predator. And Rachel, kind, generous, and trusting, had become a victim in her own home, in her own life. But now, the truth had begun to surface. And the full horror of what Daniel had done was no longer hidden behind smiles and small talk. In the days following Daniel Whitmore's arrest, the town of Cedar Grove transformed from a place of routine and familiarity into one of disbelief and suspicion. Headlines labeled it a suburban tragedy, and neighbors who once waved across trimmed hedges now stood in quiet clusters on sidewalks, murmuring about what they had missed. How could someone so composed, so polite, commit such a calculated crime? The answer, as investigators uncovered more, was chilling in its precision. With Daniel in custody, prosecutors began building their case. It didn't take long to find more disturbing details that had gone unnoticed for years. Investigators discovered he had been researching poisons, psychological manipulation tactics, and methods to discredit someone's mental health without laying a hand on them. These weren't impulsive searches made in the heat of frustration. They were methodical, repeated, spread out over months. He had studied how certain drugs interacted with the body, how to delay the onset of symptoms, how to make long-term poisoning appear like a natural decline. Rachel's autopsy was reviewed again in light of the new evidence. Forensic pathologists noticed that the bruises on her legs and arms were not all consistent with the fall. Some were older, healing. Others appeared to have been caused by blunt pressure rather than an impact from stairs. Most telling, the sedative levels in her system were just under the threshold of what might have triggered an alarm, but enough to suggest regular ingestion. When questioned further, Daniel admitted to beginning the drugging process almost 5 months before Rachel's death. He said he didn't intend to kill her right away. He wanted to weaken her, mentally and physically, until she became helpless. His ultimate goal, as he described in shocking detail, was to push her to a point where she might take her own life or make it so easy for him to stage her death that no one would ever question it. He told investigators he was tired of being embarrassed by her. He blamed her weight for his unhappiness. He said he couldn't stand waking up next to her. The words were cold, without hesitation, without shame. When asked why he didn't file for divorce, he scoffed. In his mind, divorce was failure. It would invite questions from colleagues, family members, even students. It would ruin the image of control he had built so carefully. Murder, in his mind, was cleaner. Rachel's journal became the centerpiece of the case. Her words revealed the slow destruction of her mind, piece by piece. She had doubted herself for months. She had felt helpless and confused. The entries were heartbreaking because they captured not just fear, but a desperate love for the man who was silently destroying her. She had tried to believe he still cared. She had blamed herself. She had apologized in writing for being too much, too heavy, too tired. The pages were stained with ink smudges where tears had fallen. Detective Maria Evans returned to the house to walk the space again, this time with the full weight of the truth behind her. She stood at the top of the staircase where Rachel had fallen. The angle was steep, the steps narrow. It would not take much to tip someone over the edge, especially if they were weak, groggy, disoriented. Daniel had chosen the method well. But what made it so much worse was how long he had waited, how much patience he had exercised to carry out his plan. At the pretrial hearing, Daniel sat calmly in an orange jumpsuit, hands folded, eyes vacant. Emily, Rachel's sister, was present in the courtroom. She listened as the charges were read: second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, intentional poisoning. Each charge was backed by documentation, timestamps, forensics, and a personal journal that had captured a woman's descent into a fog not of her own making. Emily spoke to the media for the first time after the hearing. She didn't cry. Her voice didn't crack. She read a statement Rachel had once written in a birthday card. "I always try to believe the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." Emily said that belief had been Rachel's strength and her downfall. The trial was set for early fall. In the weeks leading up to it, news outlets speculated on what the defense might say. Some suggested Daniel would plead insanity. Others thought he'd blame emotional distress, say he was overwhelmed, broken down by years of frustration. But his digital trail told a different story. This had not been an impulsive act. It had been planned, studied, rehearsed. The prosecution laid out a timeline with damning clarity. Starting from his first known search on poisoning spouses, they connected every stage, each online query, every pharmacy receipt, the changes in Rachel's health, the signs of psychological isolation, the day-to-day manipulation. They presented the hidden bottle of sedatives and demonstrated how the levels matched the traces found in Rachel's bloodstream. The journal, read aloud in court by a forensic psychiatrist, left the room in silence. It wasn't just evidence. It was a voice from the grave. What struck the jury most was how Daniel never expressed remorse. When asked if he regretted what he had done, he said only that he regretted how messy it got. He showed no emotion when photos of Rachel's body were presented, no reaction to the tears shed by Emily and other family members. He remained cold, unmoved, staring straight ahead as though still holding on to the belief that what he had done was justified. The defense, unable to deny the overwhelming evidence, shifted tactics. They tried to portray Daniel as a man pushed to the edge, suggesting he had suffered psychological strain due to Rachel's weight, claiming emotional abuse. But the courtroom rejected it. There was no record of Rachel mistreating Daniel. Every witness described her as gentle, patient, and giving sometimes to a fault. The defense's strategy fell apart under cross-examination. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Daniel was found guilty on all counts. The judge, known for her composed demeanor, called it one of the most heartless and deliberate domestic crimes I've seen in my career. She sentenced Daniel to 40 years without the possibility of parole. After the sentencing, Emily visited Rachel's grave. She brought the journal and left it beneath a bouquet of daisies, Rachel's favorite. She stayed there for a long time, reading aloud the last entry Rachel had written. "I still hope things can get better. Maybe tomorrow." That hope had kept Rachel alive longer than she should have been. It had blinded her to the danger forming behind her husband's eyes. And in the end, it had been used against her. But now the world knew the truth. Rachel's story became a warning, a lesson, a reminder that abuse doesn't always come with bruises or shouting. Sometimes it comes quietly, through neglect, through manipulation, through slow, deliberate erasure. And sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who know exactly how to hide in plain sight. The aftermath of Daniel Whitmore's conviction left deep scars not only in Rachel's family but across the entire Cedar Grove community. In the weeks following the verdict, conversations changed. The casual small talk exchanged over picket fences and grocery store aisles now carried an underlying tension. People questioned their perceptions of those closest to them. The man they had once admired, respected, even trusted with their children had turned out to be a cold-blooded murderer, hiding in the comfort of a neatly trimmed lawn and a buttoned-up collar. It was a truth that made people feel vulnerable in ways they hadn't before. Emily, Rachel's sister, became a quiet but powerful voice in the aftermath. She gave interviews to local media outlets, not for fame or attention, but because she believed her sister's story could prevent another tragedy. She spoke about signs often overlooked, how Rachel had slowly withdrawn, how she had seemed tired and anxious, how her health had changed subtly over time. Emily emphasized that there was no shouting, no bruises visible to outsiders, no cries for help that anyone had recognized for what they were. Rachel had suffered in silence, convinced that love and patience would eventually fix what was broken. But the person she was trying to fix had already made up his mind. Rachel's journal became a symbol of resilience and warning. Portions of it were published in a women's advocacy magazine under the title "If I Disappear, Check Everything," the haunting phrase Rachel had written just weeks before her death. Her words resonated with countless readers, women and men who had once doubted their own intuition, who had felt the sting of emotional neglect and psychological control. The journal was raw, honest, and heartbreaking, capturing the subtle erosion of Rachel's sense of self until there was almost nothing left. A local nonprofit started an awareness campaign in her name. They distributed flyers and held workshops about coercive control, gaslighting, and psychological abuse, terms that often went unrecognized in traditional conversations about domestic violence. One session was titled "When Silence is a Warning," and it focused on helping friends and family recognize the quiet red flags that often go unnoticed: sudden isolation, unexplained health issues, or the soft apologies people make for partners who have slowly taken away their independence. Daniel was transferred to a maximum security prison, where he quickly faded into anonymity. Once praised for his discipline and intellect, he was now just another inmate, stripped of all illusions. He received no visitors, no letters of support. Former colleagues disavowed him, and the school district where he had worked released a public statement, expressing sorrow over the tragedy and reinforcing their commitment to student and community safety. His home, once a symbol of suburban peace, was sold quietly and at a loss. The new owners repainted the walls, tore up the carpeting, and replaced the staircase. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't need to. The town already knew the story. Rachel's funeral had been small, but months later, a community memorial service drew hundreds. People gathered in the town square under soft lights and recited her words aloud. They lit candles. They placed photos of Rachel smiling, baking, holding her niece on a table surrounded by her favorite flowers. A local choir sang quietly, and Emily read a letter she had written to her sister. In it, she promised to keep telling her story, to make sure she wasn't remembered just for how she died, but for how she lived, for her kindness, her generosity, her belief in people, even the one who ultimately betrayed her. One of the most disturbing realizations that emerged from the case was how easily Daniel had hidden in plain sight. He was never loud, never violent, never the kind of man people feared. That was precisely what made him so dangerous. He had crafted an image of quiet competence, used silence as a shield, and isolated Rachel so effectively that even she began to doubt her instincts. His manipulation wasn't just of her, it was of everyone around them. In time, documentaries were made. Journalists retraced Rachel's final months, pointing to the quiet signs, her journal entries, the unexplained bruises, the subtle changes in behavior. Her story became a case study in criminal psychology classes. Experts dissected Daniel's methods, his calculated planning, his digital footprint, his emotional detachment. But while the academic and legal worlds tried to understand the mechanics of the crime, Emily remained focused on its emotional cost. She often spoke about Rachel in present tense, as if keeping her alive through memories. She kept the journal, its pages now preserved in a shadow box in her home office. On hard days, she would read Rachel's words, not just the painful ones, but the hopeful entries too, the ones where she wrote about plans for a garden, thoughts about returning to school, dreams of becoming a counselor for women in crisis. Those were the dreams that Daniel had silenced. But through Emily's work, those dreams found a second life. 1 year after Rachel's death, Cedar Grove held a vigil in the park near the library. It was the same park where Rachel had once hosted summer book fairs and community bake sales. People spoke about her courage even if she hadn't known she was being brave. Survivors of abuse came forward to share their own stories inspired by hers. And slowly, what had begun as a story of loss transformed into a story of resilience. Rachel's case changed how people in Cedar Grove looked at one another. It reminded them that evil doesn't always look like a monster. It can wear a friendly face and speak in soft tones. It can live in the house next door. But it also reminded them that awareness can save lives, that journals can be evidence, that a quiet voice even after death can be powerful enough to spark change. Daniel Whitmore will spend decades behind bars, his carefully constructed life shattered by the truth he tried to bury. But Rachel's legacy endured. Not as a victim, but as a woman whose final act writing down her reality shined a light into the darkest corners of domestic control. And in that light, others found their voices. In the end, the chilling truth wasn't just that a man killed his wife because she no longer met his expectations. It was that he believed no one would care enough to notice. He was wrong because Rachel's story was noticed. It was heard. And it was remembered.